AvGeeks and welcome back to this year's first episode of the Victor 2 podcast. You're in for a treat today as we have a very special guest who my fellow subcommittee member Nilesh will be interviewing. How's it going, Nilesh?
I'm good. I've never done this before, so I'm definitely excited for today's podcast, especially since we're interviewing someone in my family.
Awesome. Our special guest today is Siva Govindasamy, the current Vice President Public Affairs of Singapore Airlines. Siva's role includes overseeing executive, strategic and internal communications, global media relations, and public engagement on the airline's social media channels, as well as being the head of corporate communications, corporate social responsibility, and community relations. His past positions saw him working at Airbus, Reuters News Agency, Flight Global, and many more. I would also like to acknowledge that Singapore Airlines is a current partner of the UNSW Aviation Society. So, without further ado, please welcome Siva.
Hey Siva, how have you been?
I'm good, thank you.
Are you working from home or are you back in the office?
Today I am working outside the office. We now go back to the office. Well, theoretically, we go back to the office at least 3 times a week. For me, depending on whether I have meetings in the office or not.
In terms of like working from home, how have your corporate meetings been on Zoom?
We were completely working from home only for around 4 months last year. Between 3 to 4 months. Even then, because we are in the aviation industry, the Singapore government gave us an exemption. So because we consider it essential service, so within an essential service, certain designated people can go back to the office if they need to, and I was one of those. So I was going back to the office maybe once a week.
Yeah, especially with corporate meetings right now, a lot of them, like you said, are on Teams. So how is that? Like usually you have to fly to a different country when you need to go for a really important meeting or...
Yeah, so that's been difficult because we have, for example, as part of my team, I have 15 PR managers who are based outside Singapore in all of our key markets around the world. And I've not been able to meet them in person because usually either I would go there or they would come to Singapore. They would also come to Singapore for annual PR meetings. We've not been able to hold those.
Yeah.
So it's been a bit of a challenge, but we've managed to adapt. You know, you have maybe more frequent discussions and we adapted. Still, I don't think it makes up for the fact that a physical meeting just helps a lot more.
Yeah,
having
definitely.
everybody together for 2 days or so and discussing things, and you know, whether it's in a formal setting or an informal setting within that meeting, those 2 days rather, nothing beats that. So we've had to cope and we've had to adapt. We've adapted very well, but I think everybody's quite keen to go back to being able to see each other in person.
Now we would like you to take us back to the beginning of your career in aviation. How did you get into the industry, and was it always a passion of yours?
Well, not quite. I started as a journalist. So my career, I've spent more time as a journalist. Out of the 16 years that I was a journalist, 10 was spent reporting on the aviation and defense industries. So that's really how I got into aviation in a more in-depth way. And that then led to me subsequently joining Airbus, where I looked after corporate communications for Airbus in the Asia Pacific region. That was in 2016. And in 2019, I joined Singapore Airlines in my current role.
So did you do a degree in aviation or journalism or?
Neither, actually. My degree was in politics. So
interesting.
that was fundamentally, that was my real passion, politics and history. passions
Cool.
rather. So when I was in university, I just followed what I wanted to do, and I had a great time studying history and politics. And then I sort of stumbled into journalism after I graduated from university. Uh, so I did not study aviation. I learned about aviation on the job. I always had an interest in aviation, but as a journalist, you need to really get in depth into the industry. You need to understand the industry, especially in the roles that I had, where I became almost like a specialist in the aviation industry. So a lot of my understanding of what the aviation industry is all about was spent on the job as a journalist. And subsequent to that, when I joined Airbus and then now Singapore Airlines, it gave me a different experience, a different kind of exposure directly in the industry. So that's where my educational background is. So learning about aviation also came a bit more easily for me because it became a passion. I started wanting to know more about how aircraft flew. I wanted to know more about how airlines operated. I wanted to know how airlines made the decisions that they made. So I went and read up quite a bit. I talked to a lot of executives. Being a journalist is quite good because it opens doors. And people, senior executives want to talk to you, share their time with you, and that was important. And that allowed me to get a really in-depth understanding of what the aviation industry is all about.
That's cool. It's amazing to think that we actually have a degree that is focusing on aviation management as a whole, especially since it's something that they didn't have many years back. It's very niche and it's very relevant to a turbulent time right now where industry professionals want people to bring change and understand what people worked in the past, but more importantly, how we can shape the future of the aviation industry as well.
Yeah, I think with regards to a degree like aviation management, it's important because the aviation industry is not an easy industry to understand. It's a pretty complex industry.
It is.
And there are many facets to it. So I think a specialized degree like aviation management allows you to get a broad breadth of understanding. However, one very important thing is it is not enough to just get the degree. It is not enough to just on a theoretical level understand what the aviation industry is all about. There's nothing like getting your hands dirty and by getting into the industry, because then you will realize that, as with most things, about 50% of what you learned on paper, or even more probably, has absolutely no relevance to a real life situation, a real life scenario, especially when you're having to make decisions on the fly, on the go. And management in itself, by nature, it's about being able to make decisions, a judgment based on considered facts, based on all of the information that you have at that point, and then hoping you're right. And that's what management is really all about. So there's the degree doesn't help you with that. It's the experience which really helps.
So could you tell us a bit more about your transition into working with leading global aviation companies like Singapore Airlines and Airbus?
Yeah, so being a journalist was very interesting and exciting. When I had the opportunity to join Airbus, which is my first job in the industry directly, it allowed me an opportunity to really have an in-depth look at how an aircraft manufacturer operated. One of the advantages of being in a corporate communications role is that you are exposed to the entire company. What are the advantages that you have, or in any corporate communications role for that matter, is that you are not just focusing on your role. The entire point of corporate communications is that you get a deep understanding, as much as you can, of every facet of the company. So you understand about engineering, operations, marketing, sales, business development, commercial considerations, strategic considerations, and so that was very interesting for me, because as a corporate communications executive, you have to be able to offer counsel, strategic counsel to the senior management about decisions that could have an impact on the company's reputation. And anything and everything within the company can potentially have an impact on the company's reputation if it is not taken care of or considered when you're making decisions. And so that was where I found it very exciting and very interesting going to Airbus. And so that allowed me to get into detail about issues such as aircraft manufacturing, for example, the rationale behind outsourcing of aircraft parts, behind investments in individual countries, for example, and how the aerospace industry has truly become a global industry. It is not just, while the two major manufacturers are based in the US and in Europe, they are not just US and European companies. They are global companies, and they need to have a global footprint in order to survive in an industry that is global, and in order to work with customers who are based outside of their headquarters.
Yeah.
So all of that was very interesting for me. Joining Singapore Airlines was slightly different because I had spent 3 years at Airbus. And joining Singapore Airlines meant that I'm now focused on an airline. I have to understand how the airline works. It's a wonderful airline, one of the world's best airlines. But again, it's a bit more specialized in a way. But what it allowed me to do, or it has allowed me to do, is really get to grips with what makes an airline tick and what makes an airline successful, especially in a highly competitive airline industry where profit margins are extremely thin. And that was very exciting, and I loved it. Of course, I didn't expect the challenge that COVID has brought. I don't think anybody would have, but it has allowed me to get into some things which I would never have seen before. What makes an airline survive, and how? And now, as we plan for our recovery from the depth or the biggest impact of the pandemic, that allows me an opportunity to really be involved in the decision making that will allow us to form a strategy that would allow us to cope with what will inevitably be a more competitive airline industry. So that is very exciting for me.
Yeah. On that note, would you have any advice on what sort of skills current aviation students should work on to remain relevant and employable in the industry?
That's a tough question, because I think skills are, it's very hard to specify what skills. I like to, when maybe the easier way to answer it is to explain to you what I look for when I hire people. When I do interviews, I'm looking for people who are adaptable, people who are able to think on the fly, people who have a track record of collaboration, people who have an ability to handle projects, not necessarily leading them if you are coming at a junior level, but an ability to sink your teeth into a project and come up with solutions.
So could you tell us a little bit more about what the present situation Singapore Airlines is looking like at the moment?
Yeah. So the COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented situation for the entire airline industry. Global borders have not been shut the way they have over the last 700 years. Even at the height of the world wars, early in the 20th century, they were not shut like this. The aviation industry, the international aviation industry, and an airline like Singapore Airlines, which does not have a domestic market, is completely dependent on international borders being open. We can't fly domestically. And our business model is premised on using our hub in Singapore to transport passengers to Singapore and through Singapore to other parts of the world. So it is an unprecedented time. We've never had a crisis like this. So for context, in March this year, as a group, so Singapore Airlines as well as Scoot, which is our local subsidiary, we carried 100,000 passengers in March. In December 2019, which is the last real meaningful month before COVID hit, we carried 3.3 million passengers. So that just shows how dramatic the change is. So as we deal with this crisis, our focus has been on firstly surviving the crisis, because as a company, it's very difficult to deal with such a big drop in revenues. So we dealt with it through our fundraising measures. Secondly, we had to make the changes necessary to be ready for the future. One advantage that we have is that we are a well-known brand, a well-known airline. Our customers are extremely loyal. They love us and they value us.
Yeah.
And we've not taken that for granted, but we've ensured that we've done everything we can to improve our health and safety measures and focus on retaining our customers. And the way to do that is by investing in what we know our customers want and will want, even out of this crisis. And that means world-class service, industry-leading products and services, and an excellent connectivity to and through Singapore. And we've maintained all of this. Today, we are at about 26% of pre-COVID capacity, even though passenger numbers are low. A lot of it is underpinned by our cargo business, which has been a real star over the last year. And I won't get into details on that. But the future is good. And the reason why I say that is because people still want to travel.
Definitely.
Just look at this conversation that we are having. We've had multiple interruptions, and technology is wonderful for bringing people together, but it doesn't make up for a personal connection. People want new experiences. People want to see families. People want to see friends, their loved ones. People want to travel. For corporate travel, for business travel, people are investing, people are setting up factories, people are going around the world to make money. It will return. So we have absolutely no doubt that the industry will bounce back. And we're seeing signs of it. You look at the domestic market in certain countries like Australia, for example. Look at in the US, for example, load factors are extremely high. It's just that internationally, it's challenging to reopen borders when there are new waves of the pandemic. But we'll get past it.
Yeah. So before we wrap up our interview, we're going to give you a little challenge. You're going to enter a couple of rapid fire questions. So here's how it works. You have 60 seconds to answer as many questions as possible. And once you give your answer, there's no going back. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Window or aisle seat?
Aisle.
Helicopters or hot air balloons?
Helicopters.
Day flight or night flight?
Day flight.
Airbus or Boeing?
No comment.
Favorite country you've flown to?
Favorite country I've flown to?
Rapid fire.
Bali.
Okay. Sleep or watch a movie on a flight?
Watch a movie.
Long turbulence or no food?
Long turbulence.
Changi Airport or Dubai Airport?
Changi.
Of course.
Any day.
Departure hall or arrival hall?
Arrival.
Long haul flight or short haul flight?
Short haul.
Favorite aircraft type? Rapid
Concorde.
fire.
Concorde.
Concorde. Fly for free in economy forever or always pay for a first class ticket but fly in business?
Fly in business.
Win $1 million and fly in the cargo hold for the rest of your life or never be able to fly again?
Win $1 million flying.
Any day.
Hey, so how did it go, Nilesh?
It was amazing. Something I definitely did not expect was how informative this interview was going to be. Aside from asking me a lot of questions, I also learned so much and gained a lot of insight into the aviation industry at a global level as a listener as well.
Awesome. Thank you once again to my subcommittee member, Nilesh, our UNSW Aviation Society partner, Singapore Airlines, and our very special guest today, Siva Govindasamy. I'd also like to thank all of our listeners today. We look forward to seeing you at our future podcasts throughout the year, as we also have some other guests lined up.